And thank you, Alyssa, for coordinating and getting this going. And this is a presentation of the American Association of Jewish Lawyers and Jurists. We are thrilled you are here today. Mark Meirowitz and I have been talking about this for some time, and he very appropriately cornered me at a recent meeting, and so we just have to get this going. And among the many reasons that we've wanted this is Turkey is such an important player, but it's not one that we have a standard knowledge base about. And I think we have found the perfect person to talk with. So Mark is a JD and PhD. He is an attorney in New York, and he he teaches at the American Foreign Policy Company at SUNY Maritime. Well, that makes perfect sense. So his expertise is in a Turkey foreign policy, Turkish-US relations, and Turkish-Israel relations. And we can just imagine how important all of this is right now. So we'd like to keep to our usual format of Mark, you speak for about 30 minutes, and then we call for questions. Just to make it a little bit easier, my request is that folks use the chat function, and you can send to me. My name is Rhonda Lees, and that will just give me the chance to format things back and forth. But as usual with these presentations, people are very thoughtful and knowledgeable, and this is always informative. So Dr. Mark, take it away.
Well, Rhonda, Alyssa, and AAJLJ, it's a great privilege to do something with you. And it was very nice to be in Washington at the same time as you had that amazing program, which was really, you know, a newsbreaker and with a very, very prominent official. So I learned a lot from that. And I also got to meet a number of people, which was really, really nice. And thank you for the privilege of doing this. Obviously, the topic is one of very, very immediate concern. But I've been following this for years. It's been one of my academic concentrations. But now it's kind of like fashion, right? It's gotten into vogue. I hate to say it. But what I thought I would do is, and I gave Alyssa sort of a page of the dramatis personae of who's who and what's what. I thought I would start with that. And if you have that and you can pull it up, Alyssa, that would be great. It was, and I send it to you, Rhonda, as well, if you have it, to share the screen with that. And let's see if we can do that. Okay, great. I know it's a little small. I'm sorry about that, but didn't look like that originally. It was actually a full page. So, you know, I think the important thing to do is to kind of go through who are the characters, players in this, and then kind of go down the list, and then come up with some analysis, hopefully, and concerns. This is a very deeply complicated area. So I try to do it in 30 minutes as much as I can, but I welcome your questions, which is very important, please, let me have your questions. So first of all, in my list of the dramatis personae of the characters playing the role here is obviously Turkey and President Erdogan. We certainly will talk more about him and his policies and approaches, making Turkey really a major player in the regional scene, in the international scene. It's a NATO member of NATO, very pivotal in terms of, for example, the admission of Sweden and Finland, really important. American bases are there. And so strategically, Turkey's a very, very important power. More on that in terms of Syria, Israel to come. The PKK is could we still have the list up? I'm going to talk over the list. Can I share it again?
Let me just put that back up in 1 second.
Yes, thank you. And then when we're done with the whole list, then we'll take it down if that's okay with you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Just give me one.
This way, people who are watching this can actually follow.
Yes, also says the billable weight is 17 pounds.
Sorry.
UPS, if that's true, and those dimensions
everybody
are correct, that
needs
they said, it would be $24.11.
Lawrence, I need you to mute yourself.
Well, thank
Yeah,
you. I'm so I'm listening to a seminar about Turkey and Syria.
Oh, you guys gonna,
It's in
Syria
sorry,
and-
give me 1 second, everybody.
AAJLJ.
Okay, everybody needs to immediately mute themselves, please. I'm sorry about that. Okay.
Thank
Okay.
you. And then I'll say when I finish the whole list, maybe we can take it down. Thank you.
Of course. Rhonda, are you able to share that? I gave you permission.
Yes, I am. So give me a moment, please.
Thanks so much. Sorry about that.
Thank you very much I think it's helpful to go down the list. It's so many players and so many things that just becomes impossible to follow. Perfect. So I spoke about Erdogan, and we'll more on that, and Hakan Fidan, who is the foreign minister, who is a very important player, was formerly the head of intelligence in Turkey, playing a very important role. And some people believe he is a possible successor to President Erdogan, although I'm not so sure about that because the likely successor would probably be a son or a son-in-law. And right now, President Erdogan says he wants to run for another term. His term is limited in 2028. I can talk more about that because he does need the votes of the Kurdish parliamentarians in order to achieve that. The Kurdish population and the PKK is a terrorist group on the State Department terrorist list. It is responsible for murders of civilians in Turkey. I would say virtually all Turks are united in their condemnation of the PKK. The United States supports that condemnation, but at the present time, Turkey has opened a peace process, or PKK has opened a peace process with Turkey, which hinges around the leader of the PKK, who's Abdullah Öcalan, who is in prison on an island called Imrali. He's been in prison for many, many years. This came up really in a way out of the blue, and it was also proposed by the head of the Nationalist Party, which was the most aggressive opponent of the PKK. So very surprising. The CHP, or CHP, is a Republican People's Party, and that has the it's the party of Ataturk, which has been, the opposition, but there have been actions taken in Turkey to limit their authority, replace their mayors, and take actions against them. The USA, well, of course, President Trump obviously leads the way, but President Trump has made very favorable statements about President Erdogan, also about the leader of Syria, al-Shara. He met with al-Shara, who I'm going to talk about, and said he was a young guy and freedom fighter, all kinds of nice words about him. And al-Shara is a top dresser. I'm trying to learn how to dress as nicely as he dresses. He has his turtleneck with a jacket, absolutely great. I don't have a beard, but it's a real look. And The Economist really touched on that when they interviewed al-Shara, because apparently a number of times in the interview, he kept saying, "Do you see my suit? Do you see my suit?" Well, the point is, originally his suit, his outfit was a jihadi outfit. He was affiliated with Al-Qaeda, with ISIS. I'm going to speak about him more in a moment. I just want to hit Ambassador Barak and Senators Risch and Shaheen. These are very, very important players in this story. Ambassador Barak is the ambassador to Turkey, the special envoy for Syria, and also, I believe, also for Lebanon. I'm not sure, but I believe it. Well, of course, he's Lebanese, so he has a very big influence. He's a friend of the president's, and I'm going to talk a lot about him because what is happening with Barak is kind of the pivot of the whole region, because he is in effect making the policies, not so much Marco Rubio, and he has been very favorable to Turkish foreign policy and very favorable to al-Shara's positions. Senator Risch is the chairman of the Foreign Policy Committee, and he has said in the nominating hearing for Tom Barak that Turkey will never get the F-35s. I will talk more about those. But right now, as you might recall, Turkey was ejected from the F-35 super stealth fighter program because Turkey took the S-400 Russian defense system. That was a violation, and also was sanctioned by Congress at the end of Trump's term under the National Defense Authorization Act. And Senator Rich said at the hearing, as long as I'm senator, I'm the chair of the Foreign Relations Committee, Turkey will never get the F-35. On the other hand, there's a lot of talk in Washington about Turkey getting the F-35. Maybe Barrack is advocating very pro-Turkey policies as well. Jean Shaheen made a trip to Syria recently. She's a ranking member of Foreign Relations and had very credible points to make about the treatment of the minorities in Syria. And she went to a monastery and met with minorities, all fine and good. But she wants all the sanctions on Syria to be removed in their entirety. Right now, there still are moving sanctions. There are sanctions under what's called the Caesar Act, which was basically anti-Assad regime. But these sanctions have a 180-day roll around. So they come up and they have to be renewed. President Trump's view, and you will remember President Trump when he made his trip, remember? And he stood up and said, my friend MBS asked me, and now I announce I'm going to remove all the sanctions on Syria. Okay? So, of course, policy comes from the top, but as we know, studying foreign relations, when we get it down to Tom Barrack, there is some flux, and some of it is problematic, to be sure. Some of it is, a matter of fact, Laura Loomer, you might have heard of Laura Loomer. Laura Loomer called out Barrack in a tweet, and she basically said, President Trump, you've got to get rid of this guy because he's too pro-jihadi in Syria, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. What's that all about? But as a point of information, Syria. Now, Syria is the key, really. It's the petri dish that we're doing our, not experiment, but our analysis of the conflict between Turkey, Israel, and Syria. That's where it's happening, and it really affects the entire region, HTS, Al-Jawlani al-Shara. Now, this is the kind of, and again, I mentioned to you before, and you know you've been reading about him, because his name is Ahmed al-Shara, but his real nom de guerre is Al-Jawlani. And what is Jawlani? The Golan. And why is that? Because his family owned olive groves in the Golan, which were dispossessed and taken away by the Israelis when the Israelis took over the Golan. You got it? You see, you listen to that because it's really important. Did you want to say something, Rhonda? Oh, you have your hand up. So, I mean, listen, it's Zoom protocol, Zoom etiquette. You have your hand up. Okay. So the point is, al-Shara, that, and in fact, with the help of the Turks, got a whole new look. Not an ISIS guy. He was affiliated with ISIS. He was with al-Baghdadi. He was with al-Qaeda. He was with all these groups. I believe he was also in prison in Abu Ghraib. I mean, he's actually was a serious jihadi, but then he moved his operation to Syria and was operating in a small area. And now here's the miracle point that we should talk about, because how come al-Shara's in the president of Syria? Thank you, Israel. Because Israel took out Hezbollah, it took out the Iranian defenses. It opened the vacuum for al-Shara with his about 35,000 fighters in HTS, which is Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, to be able to overthrow Assad. This was Israel's having done this. Also, I should mention that Russia, which had bases, and still has them in Syria, a warm water port in Tartus and other bases, including Khmeimim, were distracted by Ukraine, couldn't become involved. So that opened it up. And in addition to the 35,000 or so fighters, when he took power, he needed more help. So they brought in some more jihadis to bolster. These are Uyghur Turks to come in. These are jihadis to help him bolster. But the point was, when he took power, 35,000 troops, you recognize he could not control the country. Okay, he does not control the country at the present time. Now, some counterweights to him, and of course, and I wanted to say and we'll come back to al-Shara. When you look at him, you don't know what he is. And the Economist had it, jihadi, nation builder, diplomat. But we don't know about him. We don't know enough about him. He looks to be pragmatic. I was going to say moderate, but I'm really shaking with that one, because what's happened in Syria is an absolute breakdown in, we'll call it law and order to use the American idea. But so we have a number of groups. Now remember, Assad is Alawites. So the Alawites were supported by Assad, but also Assad protected the Christians. Now the worm has turned, and you now have a Sunni jihadi Muslim in charge. And the question is, can they make arrangements with the different groups? Now, with the Kurds, and this is really central to understand this, the Kurds in Syria have been fighting Turkey. Turkey does not want the Kurds to create a statelet or an autonomous region in Syria. But the fact is, the Kurds, SDF, which is the Syrian Defense Forces, which comprises basically what's called the YPG, just should have written that down. In any event, that group has fought with American troops in CENTCOM. They're our allies. The Turks were quite enraged when an American officer was wearing a Kurdish pin. And what they do there in terms of the Kurds is that they maintain the prisons in which the ISIS jihadis are imprisoned. And what is very, very worrisome is the sort of community of families of the jihadis, women and children. Many of the children, I just watched a whole discussion, how the children in these camps are becoming radicalized. So the question is what to do with those prisons. The Turkish approach is close the prisons down, or we'll take it over, and we repatriate those fighters back to their home countries. Syria says, SDF, YPG, you've been fighting in Syria against the Turks. What I want now is a cohesive, unitary army of Syria. I want you to come and be integrated into the Syrian forces. An agreement to this effect was made in March 2025 with General Mazloum Abdi. However, with the ensuing developments, the Kurds have not agreed to do this. They say, we want to remain in the Syrian military as a unit. Al-Shara says no, and guess who backs them up? Ambassador Tom Barrett of the United States. Remember, he's an ambassador. Now, of course, he's a friend of the president. It's very important. But an ambassador normally does not make policy, okay? But he backs up the idea of the Turkish approach, central government in control of the country, and everybody's got to get on the program. Problem is, as I know everyone has seen, these horrific massacres of the Druze in Syria, murdered on the streets, and the cutting of the beards of the Druze, reminiscent, someone put on Twitter, the cutting by the Nazis of Jewish people and their beards in the Holocaust. A massacre, also massacres, and also attacking Druze and massacring Alawites. What to make of this? And this is mostly in Sueda. We hear a lot about that. Look, the question was, could the regime become inclusive? This was Marco Rubio's point. Get everybody, include them all. But the point was that the prognosis was never very good, because they wanted to have a constitution. They made a constitution committee, right? And that committee didn't really, I don't think it had Kurds. It had like one woman, and most of the people running the government are all, I'm going to call them jihadis or ex-jihadis. They have not wrapped around all these groups, particularly the Druze. So we know what happened with the Druze, and we know that Israel came in and helped the Druze, which obviously we know the connection to Israeli Druze in Israel. is, Israeli Jews are loyal to Israel. They fight in the wars. They have positions of significance in government, and they were very distressed by the treatment of their brothers in Syria. Now the question is, which we can come back to this, I'm sure there'll be Q&A. Hey, is al-Shara responsible for this? Is it because if he's responsible for it, I don't see how it's credible for the United States to support him. If he's really creating a jihadi state, but maybe he can't control his fighters, maybe, and the foreign fighters, that's another problem. Also, the United States and Barak has spoken about. Can the foreign fighters remain in Syria? The foreign fighters who came in to bolster al-Shara, can they remain in Syria? So, Israel, had to go on heights, but in connection with this fiasco and cataclysm, came in and bombed a number of bases, T4 and Palmyra, which the Turks were going to come in and take positions in. They attacked Damascus, as you know. They had helped the Druze. They created a buffer zone beyond the Golan. And recently it was reported that they found spying devices in southern Syria that was spying on Israel. And then that's very worrisome. So the question, I think, and Russia and Putin and the bases, which I alluded to. Russia, according to al-Shara in the Economist interview, Russia can maybe stay. Iran can never be in Syria, although there are reports that there are Iranian-backed elements in Syria, and the worry is that they will be able to get a foothold again. Now, the last one on my list is really important, the Arab states. Now, we know the Arab states have been supporting al-Shara, but what's the thinking here? Syria, as my friend, one of the leading professors in Turkey says, Mark, Syria is an Arab country. And there was a big fight, a debate at the beginning when they were working on the Constitution, which, by the way, no elections for 4 or 5 years. Sharia law is the law, all right? That's already an unbelievable setback because we have minorities who are not Muslim. The question was, the minority said, we're making a new government, let's call it the Syrian Republic. But al-Shara and his regime said, no, it's the Syrian Arab Republic. Please keep this in mind, whether Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Qatar are going to permit Turkey to take over or make Turkey into a vassal regime, call it what you want. Now, Turkey and Syria have a defense agreement. The defense agreement, interestingly, does not provide for bases. I saw one iteration that said it does not provide for troops. There already are Turkish troops in Syria. The worry here, obviously, is, and I think we could take that down now if you want. We could take it down. Is that all right? I'm sorry to thank you very much. So the worry, which is, very significant, is that there could be some sort of a clash, a conflict between Turkey and Israel. They're trying to deconflict that. But if Syria is a petri dish or is a experimental device to figure out how the powers in the region are operating, then I think we have a very big problem here. Now, you know that Turkey has just initiated a complete, they say it's an airspace. The airspace is off limits to Israel, but others say it doesn't affect commercial traffic. They have closed their ports and maritime traffic. My understanding is that the oil that comes from Azerbaijan to Israel by Turkey is still flowing, but we don't know how that's going to transpire. Now, I'll tell you my own theory about this, which nobody else wrote about. So I'm telling my lawyer friends here, it has copyright protection. I'm just kidding. But the point is like this. You might recall Netanyahu just gave an interview and they asked him, what's your view on the Armenian genocide? And he first answered, the Knesset has spoken to that. And then the guy asked him again, and he goes like, I just said it. And that apparently enraged.
I'm listening to
President
something.
Trump.
What's that, Marilyn? What?
I'm sorry?
That's someone who should be muted. Sorry about that.
Oh, no,
Uh,
no.
Yeah,
So what I'm trying to say is that that also was something that was quite enraging to Turkey. I mean, we don't have to debate the Armenian genocide, but the use of the term genocide, in my humble opinion, is a very special word and shouldn't be used except where it's actually applicable. And what I can think of is the Holocaust. I mean, but that's a debatable point. I do think that, I'm going to throw this out, but I have no idea if I'm right or wrong. I just throw it out for you. But you understand that Turkey wants to receive they want the F-35. We talked about that, the super stealth fighter, which they lost. In fact, Turkish pilots were here training on those planes. They were ejected from the program. And they also ordered F-16s and F-16 modernization parts. Now, this is very, very interesting because this was a $23 billion deal that Turkey limited down to $7 billion. They got rid of the replacement parts. They don't want them. They want the F-16s. The deal is in process. This is interesting to me, very interesting, because Congress has to approve all these military transactions, right? So there are lobbies in Congress that are very influential. And, we have a Greek lobby, Armenian lobby, and so forth. They've been around for a long time. And indeed, there was a letter, I have it here somewhere, from a number of House members to Secretary Rubio, basically saying, under no circumstances should you approve the sale of F-35. So, in other words, there's a strong lobby in Congress which has been very strongly opposed to Turkey. And, again, I throw this out. I have no idea. I'm not Prime Minister Netanyahu's psychiatrist, but I think if that's what he did, it is, from a political point of view, an incredible maneuver. Because, look, I mean, by saying that, I think he gets a lot of support in the Armenian lobby. There are lobbies in Congress. I think the Turks basically misunderstand their influence. They think they're super influential. You're all, many Washington hands here. You know how influential they are or not. But from the point of view of Turkey, when the Congress works, it works with great influence. The fact of the matter is they generally don't pay attention to Congress. They pay attention to the executive. Now, if it's the executive, Trump has been saying many positive things. And Mr. Barak, Laura Loomer's foil, he says a lot of great things too. But the truth, I mean, one thing that he said, which I don't know if he walked it back, he basically said the YPG is affiliated or is the same as the PKK. This is exactly Turkey's position. And the fact is, the Syrian Kurds are not on the U.S. terror list. They're not. So that's a complete following of Turkish foreign policy. The problem you have also is in Israel, you have the Nagel report, which said that the greatest threat to Israel is Turkey, and Turkish pollsters are taking polls, and the polls are showing that Turks, and I'm assuming the elites too, believe that Israel's the greatest threat. This is very, very worrisome. Now, let's see. Why does Turkey, what's going on in the region itself? Turkey is getting, by being in the south of Syria, and if it got those bases, that would be very, very close to Israel. And that is very worrisome. And my worry also, if I may share it, although I pray very hard this will never happen, but suppose that Turkey declared a no-fly zone over Syria, and Israel was going in to protect minorities or to do what it needs to do to prevent the jihadis from obtaining control. And NATO is a NATO power. Turkey's a NATO power. It's protected by Article 5. Israel's not a NATO power. I mean, some people have written about this. I think in reality, I don't think there's any chance. I mean, that one would call on our great peacemaker, President Trump, to come in and do something like he did in Africa, like he did with India, Pakistan. He's going to have to pull these people together and tell them not to fight. But the worrisome is that, and I think it becomes that the two countries, which had very halcyon days years ago, having known an Israeli ambassador to Turkey and telling me how, what a wonderful atmosphere it was years ago. And even over the years, you have President Herzog visiting Turkey, who had a number of other things, meetings I attended, hearing very positive things. But after October 7th, that all changed. And the rhetoric that's coming out is of Turkey, which I don't have to tell you about it, but it's extremely problematic. Turkey is apparently going to spearhead to remove Israel from the General Assembly, which they can't do. I'm very, very worried. And the two-state solution, again, that's a road, down to nowhere. But again, and understand that the Gaza situation, and of course, it's been, I don't have to tell you what President Erdogan has been saying about it. And I've seen it firsthand. But the point being, the idea about Gaza against Israel has really resonated in Turkish society in my home. I didn't do a poll. I have one example. I'll give you my one, and you tell me if it's valid. I did a panel with Turkish professors at Turkish University. I was doing Turkish-U.S. relations. The next speaker before me was Palestine. And right there's a senior professor in a major university going about Israel's atrocities and genocide in Gaza, and it is committing ethnic the whole menu of screeds and outrageous accusations which have no basis. By the way, for lawyers, the International Court of Justice, I wrote a piece for Jewish Policy Center. Please read it, or please read the Ugandan judge's dissent, Judge Sebutinde. She basically says, under no theory of law, under the case law, whether that's precedential or not, I don't know. But the fact is that in no way did Israel commit genocide under the case law of the ICJ, even if that's not if presidential or not. So the whole thing is bogus, yet it's brought out, and this is not the time to talk about how much we despise the many journalists in the world who have basically acted as propagandists for this cause. But the problem I see for this topic is that this subject resonates deeply into Turkish society. And that is very, very worrisome on many, many levels. So at the end of the day, you have, and I'm going to stop here. At the end of the day, you have all of these different elements and players, and I call it a train wreck waiting to happen, although I pray that there is none. And Syria is why we focus on Syria, because Syria is really the place, the repository of all of these competing elements, including the United States and its forces there and CENTCOM. I think President Trump has withdrawn some forces. Supposing we withdraw all of our forces, very problematic. Anyway, I'll stop there, Rhonda. That's okay with you?
Perfect.
And again, as a lawyer, I feel I have the right to keep going and going and going, but I will use discretion. Thank you. Thank
Okay,
you
great.
for the opportunity.
First of all, thank you very much. I don't know about you, and I took notes, and I'm going to have to look at this again because I'm not confused because of you. I mean, I had no idea of all the different complexities. A question came to me, and that was, it's this person's understanding that on a sadly regular basis, Turkey goes in and sort of eliminates Kurdish villages under the theory of, there might be a terrorist here, and it doesn't seem to bring up any U.S. or international condemnation. And
You're talking about in Turkey or in Syria?
in Turkey.
In Turkey.
Talking about Turkey. And what was interesting was, and I'm echoing the person here, that there was an interesting article in The Atlantic a couple of years ago, and they were citing Al Jazeera articles about what Turkey was doing. But it didn't seem to, maybe, the Kurds don't have the sort of backing. I mean, certainly they deserve a state more than anyone. That's my personal opinion. But
Right.
what are your thoughts? I mean, does what?
Well, I'm going to say something about this. It's very, very important. There was a commentator many years ago in Foreign Affairs, and the question was, why did the Kurds never get a state? Why are they broken up in all places? And obviously, Rhonda, what you're talking about is, why are they in this situation? Now, by the way, just as an aside, before I touch on that, Kurds are a large part of the Turkish population. The economics minister is a Kurd, Mehmet Şimşek. So it is true that these things occurred, and there's no question about it. Now there's a peace process, maybe. But the problem with the Kurds, I think, is more significant to understand the problem here. Obviously, the reason, the problem from Turkey's point of view was the fear that Kurds would pull away and create their own state. And this is the worry that they had in Syria, as also with the Syrian Kurds. But if you go back and take your clock back to the beginning of the 20th century, you might remember and look up the Treaty of Sèvres. In the Treaty of Sèvres, the Kurds were going to get a state. But then when Ataturk came and repelled, and actually all the European powers, like they do now with Ukraine, they come and they sit and they decide, they had to sit around and have a menu, and they go like, okay, he could keep Donetsk and part of Luhansk and Crimea and this. And they did the exact same thing with Turkey because they were going to break it up and give it away. Greece, all Russia, all these countries. Okay, but it didn't work out because Ataturk came along and won the war. And this is why Ataturk is revered, and I mean revered in Turkey today. So the question is, why did the Kurds never get a state? And the answer, said this analyst, one of the top analysts, it wasn't convenient. And I think this is so important to understand. They kind of fell by the wayside here. Now, in Iraq, they have the Kurdistan Regional Government, which ironically is supported by Israel and Turkey. Okay, all right, and they have they have an autonomous region. Turkey's worry always was with the YPG, and look, the YPG is not part of it. I don't know if it's part of the PKK. I don't know that it is. Of course, Turkish diplomats who I know, they tell me, Mark, it's absolute fact. They ship across, they support them, but the United States does not take that position. Does not take that position. And CENTCOM fights with these people. So if CENTCOM is fighting with these people, I am thinking that we would not be fighting with bad dudes, okay, to use a very important concept, okay? So the fact is that now what's happening in Turkey with the peace process. Now you raise, I think the questioner asked a very profound question of all the things that happened, but then the question is what's going to happen now? And here is the problem. You have a peace process with Abdullah Öcalan, who has been in prison for years. He's allegedly the leading speaker, spokesman, leader of all the Kurds. Maybe he is, maybe he isn't, because they're divided up in Iran. They're in Iran, Azerbaijan. They're all over the place. They, that group is a Marxist-oriented group. All the Kurds, first of all, the Kurds are not a homogeneous group. They're not. They're of different tribes. They're Basanis and Talibanis. There are all kinds of tribes, and you have SDF, and you have YPG in Syria. Those are Marxists. There are all kinds of different people. Why is that important? Because if Öcalan makes a peace process, number one, does he get released from prison? That's really important. And secondly, does Mazloum Abdi, the general of the Syrian Kurds, say, yeah, well, so goes Öcalan, I got to follow him? I don't know. It's like a good kasha in the Gemara. I don't know the answer. I don't know the answer to it. But the fact of the matter is that it's not known. We don't know for sure, but probably not because, so Turkey's fear was always existential, that the fact that the Kurds would make a statelet or make a state, pull in all the Kurds, and then pull away from Turkey. The PKK exacerbated the, let us say, the perception of the Kurds by committing heinous acts. There's no question about it. Killing civilians as part of terrorism is a heinous, prohibited, condemned act. No question. So the PKK is what it is, but if they make a peace process, and that peace process can reach into Syria, right? So in addition to fighting the Kurds in Turkey, they're fighting the PKK. About the villages, about dealing with mayors and etc. That's another webinar for another day. But I think the bottom line to me, because of this wonderful question, is how do we see the future of how we can get a peaceful Syria with everybody included, which is Secretary Rubio's vision for Syria, which doesn't seem to be happening because of the massacres and attacks on these groups who apparently either al-Shara direct or cannot control.
you. That was very helpful. We have another question asking about Tom Barrett's
Yes.
um, authority or reach. Who is backing him, and why is he, one could say, possibly, seemingly running his own Mideast policy? What sort of background, pull, sway, vitamin, whatever does he have?
Well, I mean, Barrack is a longtime businessman in the Middle East, in Turkey, UAE. He's a friend of the president's. Who's backing Tom Barrack? He's a friend of President Trump. I mean, that's very, very important. Look, let's understand that. That is a plus. It's a big plus. It's a big plus to have an ambassador who has the ear of the president. He's Lebanese by background, right? He knows the region. He's been involved in business there. He's had all kinds of dealings there. And so he's familiar with the region. He's familiar with the parties. Now, as far as Syria is concerned and Turkey is concerned, he's listening to all the different people giving him advice and telling what to do, but he himself is very knowledgeable. I would say his knowledge base on Lebanon is 100,000. His knowledge base on Syria is, NI, needs improvement, just to get that in second grade. And if you didn't behave in class, NI needs improvement. He needs improvement on that, because the problem you have is if he has the ear of the president and he makes a statement, the YPG is the PKK, and he even made a point about Israel, it has to be redefined. He wasn't complimentary in a way, that's not the right word, but he wasn't recognizing Israel's tremendous contributions to helping those minorities in this. I mean, it's a humanitarian plus to the nth degree what Israel has done. All they do is get condemned. We know Israel always gets condemned. But the fact of the matter is that Israel is being looked to now by all the minorities. Can you imagine? Including the Alawites, as and you should see, I mean, the Druze, and I can tell you that I listened to a webinar in Kurdish from a Kurdish administration. And it wasn't so much about Israel, but it was really about the fact that the minorities, I mean, they recognize what Israel was doing, that the minorities are not being given the consideration and involvement that they really require. That's one thing in the Constitution. The second part, to massacre them, that one is a non-starter. But remember that the kind of, let's say, remember the Arab philosophy on this, Israel's in the Golan. Israel's in the Golan. It took the buffer zone now. Okay? So all along, and Syria technically still at war. Now, on this point, Syria and Israel have been speaking and talking. And this has been, I believe, concerning to Turkey, very concerning to Turkey. Al-Shara is pretty much, aligned with Turkey. But he's very, he makes a deal with Turkey, but no bases. He even said in the Economist interview something like, Turkey wanted to come in right away. I told them no. Interesting. So if he's their proxy or their affiliate, if he's making deals with Israel, who knows? Right now, when we're sitting here, they're making a deal. I'm sure. Israel has created the developments in the Middle East. If you had asked us a while back, would this have happened? Would there have been a bombing of Iran? Would there have been Hezbollah? Everybody said, go see a psychiatrist. You're crazy. But Israel did it. And it was, of course, I would like to have a shout out to Hashem and God. Thank you. But the fact of the matter is that if Israel and Syria work out a deal, This might be very concerning to Turkey. And maybe Turkey will not be happy anymore with al-Shara. I don't know how these levers turn, but it's tricky. It's very tricky. And there's one guy there, al-Shara, and he has all these 35,000. I mean, I don't know. How do you run a country like that? And he has jihadis and foreign fighters. This has to get sorted out. And what are they doing in their spare time? They're murdering people. I mean, that from the United States point of view, I guarantee is not acceptable. Now, I get Barak. I understand Barak. He's in a tough situation. He has the president's ear, but I think and what I've been reading is that he's starting to become more amenable to the idea that Syria might end up becoming like Switzerland, sort of little federalisms, cantons, maybe. Because think about it. Does al-Shara have the capacity right now, with everything going on, to centralize the government and take over the Kurdish troops? It's not only the Kurdish troops. And remember, in the region where the Kurds are, the SDF, that is, there are there's energy resources, and water. Don't ever forget water in the Middle East. He who controls the water controls everything. So they have a lot of influence, and they've also got CENTCOM. So if you want to work a deal and you tell the Kurds, you just have to, come into my military now with my jihadis, and, we're all going to fight together and live happily ever after. I mean, that would be an LOL. I believe that is laugh out loud. And nobody would believe it.
One technical question. You mentioned the dissent in the ICJ opinion on Israel,
Yes.
correct? Okay,
Yes.
so if I can't post that now, folks, make sure you are on our email list, because we will be sending out
Sure.
an update on that. So I will get that out to people. Only because, we're always about hope. And we haven't talked too much about this. How do you see the Abraham Accords, which of course was about Saudi, that you didn't talk about because you had 3 other countries to talk about? How do you see that? Is it on hold? Is it something that we continue to be hopeful for? That's a shrug on my part.
Yeah, it's a very complicated question to answer, and I wouldn't be in control of all the information on that. But they were talking about Israel and Syria, Syria becoming part of the Abraham Accords. I don't know. I don't know. I just say I don't know. I don't think right now it's likely. I think it is really not in the cards, because they've got to sort out a lot of things. Now, remember what Saudi Arabia said about the Abraham Accords, I think. And I think Syria would have the same position, which they always say. In fact, when they signed the Abraham Accords, you remember at the signing ceremony, the signatories for the Arab countries that are making peace with Israel said, the key to peace in the Middle East is a Palestinian question. If you don't believe me, go back and read it. And the Saudis said there will not be any Abraham Accords until it's a 2-state solution. And Syria, we're not even at that point where they would even say that. And what I think is, for Syria, is not the Abraham Accords, but some sort of an agreement. And maybe, I'm not in favor of it, but maybe Israel will pull back from the buffer zone or something like that. I don't know. I don't advocate Israel pulling back from anything, because when they pull in, they do it for a reason, and it's for protection. And we remember how many Israeli soldiers died in the Golan over the years trying to fight the Syrians on the Golan. I could tell you, my friends, we're never ever going back to that. I don't know. That is not happening. But is there a way to work something out? Maybe. And the question there would be al-Shara's leadership in that. Will he be on, and is he motivating that? If he's motivating that on his own, let's say, because remember, his people, all his group, there were all these like jihadi buddies that were in HTS or in Jabhat al-Nusra. So are they on board with all the things he wants to do? I don't know. Do we know? Do we know these Uyghur fighters, these jihadi fighters, are they on board? Do they like al-Shara? Or maybe they think he's selling out, and he's one person, and you're hooking your whole future on this one guy supported by Turkey. And if Turkey at some point becomes enamored of Mr. al-Shara, maybe they want to replace him with someone more intense, who's more favorable to Turkey, who would be allowing. Now, remember, the government there, you've got to look at this constitution document they put together. I mean, I revere our constitution, and it's really, but it, Sharia law. I mean, this was a whole debate about having no Sharia law, and even they asked him in the Economist interview, Mr. al-Shara, al-Jalani, whatever your name is. Okay, he's had many names, by the way. He's had many, many names. Will there be Sharia law in Syria when you make your constitution? Answer, whatever the committee decides. Well, you know where that's going. Then how do you have Sharia law against all these minorities? How about Sharia law for Christians? And we really don't speak a lot about them, but they live in a precarious situation. Precarious. And the irony is that Assad protected them. When Assad was out, the Christians and the jihad, we know the jihadi approach to Christians, to Alawites, to Druze, anybody, and of course to Jews, anybody that's not in their jihadi program is a dhimmi and has to be eliminated. So, like I said, in other words, you do have here, I think, and particularly with the, and I want to mention one thing about Turkey, which I forgot. One argument that Turkey will be on the program to stabilize Syria is because an unstable Syria means that the millions of refugees, 3 million plus Syrian refugees in Turkey, will not be able to return home. And that is definitely a high priority of Turkey, is for them to return. Why? Because Turkey did, and it's a humanitarian effort, and it's no question, gigantic effort for which Turkey never got any creds. They took the Syrian refugees in, and they gave them education, and they gave them health care and jobs and all that. But the Turks in Turkey don't like that. They're very opposed to it, right? Now, we know we have immigration issues in the United States. That's another webinar. But the point of the matter is, in Turkey, the Syrians, they want them back. Now, how are you going to return the Syrian refugees to Syria if Syria collapses, right? Which is the argument that the Turks want. They say we've got to stabilize Syria under al-Shara. We need to have one central government. We need to have everybody on the program working together. Okay, there's their motivation. Because if it collapses, guess what you'll have? More Syrian refugees. And so I think that there are many priorities. Obviously, the Kurds, which you mentioned, the refugees, and of course, Turkey's ability to play a role as an important regional and international power is also a factor here. Why it plays such a big role in international affairs. Regretfully, by pushing this Palestinian issue in Gaza and all that, and my humble opinion, they went down, the road to nowhere, a famous road to nowhere, where they're not going to, what are they going to get out of it? They're trying to unite the Arab world under the Turkish banner, which is kind of the Ottoman Empire, maybe, maybe not. The chances are, as I said, Syrian Arab Republic. I think it's almost time to finish, right? But if you have more questions, I can try to get one in another couple seconds.
No, this was great. I mean, this was so thorough and daunting, but hugely helpful. I mean, it helped align some of my thinking. I think we would have time for one more question if anyone's comfortable placing it in the chat.
Now, by the way, about the ICJ, I can send you the analysis that I did for the
Please.
JPC. I mean, you can read a decision, you can read it, but the one to read is the dissenting opinion.
Yes, and this is what I tried to get, but I'm not positive that I did.
That's the one.
We
But
welcome anything you want to send
I'll
out.
send you
Please
that
do.
because I think, it's important to try to understand why, the emperor has no clothes here. It's such ridiculous. I mean, we know why South Africa did it. It was under Iran and all the other reasons that they did it. But here's a Ugandan judge who actually, is actually, reading the cases and saying, you have to have intent. This is like, elementary school, nursery school law, and especially international court. which is no, there's really no, I don't know that there's precedential value, maybe customary international, I'm not really sure. But the point is, there's nothing in the case. The cases actually say that. They say there's no genocide if there's no intent. And how is there intent? They keep saying that Israel is doing all these things that are helpful. So how can they be intending it? And I don't need to explain to everybody here why
So-
Israel is not committing genocide. I mean, that
We
just
get it. And again, if you wouldn't mind sending that to us, that'll be great. We'll get that
Sure,
out.
sure.
We're getting towards the end. Alyssa, do you want to, I need to call you out. If you're able to jump, oh, by the way, Richard Huberman, Richard, thank you for being here. I forgot to call you out earlier, my bad. Alyssa, if you're able to talk about our next events and bring it home. Otherwise, I can do it.
Sure. Sorry about that. So we do have, thank you so much, Rhonda, and thank you to Mark. This was really, really
Pleasure.
excellent. So we do have on September 10th, we have a great webinar coming up with Ord Kittry. And that is on the UN's lawfare against Israel. And on September 18th, we have a webinar with Richard Heidemann and Joseph Tipograph of Heidemann Newman Calic, and they will be discussing one of their recent cases against UNRWA, I believe. That's correct, right? Right, Rhonda? Yes. And we have some other announcements coming up. We'll let everybody know in the coming days, but it's great to see everybody after, as the summer wraps up. And we do have a lot planned, including these webinars before the holidays and then of course after the holidays. So thank you again to everybody, to Mark and Rhonda, and we have recorded this as well. So we will send out a recording. Thanks. And please join the AAJLJ.
Yes, we will be continue to put information on that, and we welcome people's input. And Mark, again, this was great. Just
it's my
a
pleasure.
whole new world.
Happy to
and
do anything for you guys anytime.
additional complication, but this was hugely helpful. It really helped my
Yes.
thinking. So on behalf of AAJLJ, thank you again for Mark, Alyssa, running this today. We will be in touch with additional information. I hope that people found it to be helpful. I appreciate the questions, and we're going to sign off. So thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye.